The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to a discussion with Carolyn Foster. I'm Eileen Cavanaugh from the Hennepin County Library Program Office, and my guest today is the author of the Family Patterns Workbook, Breaking Free from Your Past and Creating a Life of Your Own. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you, Eileen. It's good to be here.
It seems as if nature provided us with a family to pass down values and to protect us. Why is that same family so often a source of trouble for us?
Well, I think it stems from the fact that we inherit language, attitudes, and behavior from our family. Even if it doesn't suit our temperament or suit our later life situation, we tend to repeat those patterns without even being conscious of them. And some of the patterns may have worked well in your original family, but not in the situation you find yourself in later. And some of the patterns may not have worked too well at the time. But because families are like miniature cultures, we are so immersed in it, we don't know the difference.
So it's sort of like being served a plate of vegetables, and you have to choose from those even though you may not like all of them.
Well, I think the patterns are ones that we internalize. We carry our parents' voices, our parents' style of thinking within us, and the way that the family interacted is what we take for granted as children as the way things are. For instance, a student of mine once said that he didn't realize how unusual his family was until he started sleeping over at other friends' houses when he was a young boy. In his family, every family member ate dinner in silence. They sat at the same table, but they were expected, not just the children and the adults. Two, they didn't speak to one another, and then they would get up and go to their individual rooms, and they wouldn't talk or do anything with one another till the next morning. It was a very monastic, silent existence, and that was the way that family worked. And when he went to these other houses, he thought, what is all this noise and confusion? And so he came to my workshop because as an adult, he couldn't understand why his wife wanted him to talk, what seemed to him, all the time. And she felt just an occasional remark was what she wanted, but for him, that was so different from the way his family culture had been.
And of course, when the child is living in the family and absorbing all these traits, that child doesn't know, I assume, enough to say, this isn't me, this isn't the way I want to be.
That's right. In fact, children, if anything, tend to blame themselves if something isn't working or if something doesn't fit. And that's because for children, as with animals, we're very dependent on the parents. We need the care. And so rather than imperil our sense of survival by saying, you know, boy, I got a bad mom, the child will say, there's something wrong with me that mom's so angry or that she's drinking or that she treats us this way. And that you internalize a sense of poor self-esteem or a sense of that you're somehow bad or deficient. You carry that then into your later life.
How does, I know this is a question often asked, but it always intrigues me, how does it happen that there will be one child in a family who seems to be totally wiped out by a dysfunctional family, but other children in the family may go on to do wonderful things, or may take that and turn it around?
Yes.
For instance, with an alcoholic parent may say, I'm determined that I won't have any drinking in my family and I'll train my children. And
yes. Yeah, alcoholism is a little complex because they do feel there is some genetic factor in the way it's passed down, but so are many temperamental traits. So I would say there are two things operating there. Some children are temperamentally better suited to handle stress and crisis than others. Doesn't mean they're better as persons, it just means that their particular makeup makes them resilient. That's the word the psychologists are using a lot now. makes them strong and able to adapt to even traumatic conditions. And the other factor is that perhaps the resilient child's role in the family is to be the rescuer, to be the caretaker, the one who always is responsible and handles things. Families tend to parcel out roles, and yet that inevitably means that you don't get to express all of who you are. For instance, one of my students once said, "Well, my brother was the smart one, what does that make me?" And she laughed when she said it, but she also felt that her own mental abilities had never been recognized, and she felt a little inferior about them.
Especially if she may have had some different kind of intelligence that
Yes.
wasn't so clear-cut as the other child's.
Yes, absolutely.
I have to hearken back to the title of your book, which is Family Patterns Workshop, and so it implies that there is a workbook here,
Yes.
and that this is not a passive book to read.
No, it's an
that
interactive
you are going
book.
to expect us to do something with it.
Yes, I found that writing is a wonderful tool for insight and growth. And so in working with people in classes from which this book grew over about the last 5 or 6 years, I developed a series of writing exercises to help people understand the patterns that they may have inherited from their family past, and then be able, after you're aware of them, to assess the impact of those patterns on your life now, and then to plan small, manageable changes. So we always set ourselves up for failure. We say, okay, I'm going to change everything, and it's no more useful than going on a diet, trying to stop smoking, and reforming all your bad habits at once. Instead, we need to remember that change is a process, and that the 3 stages of awareness, assessment, and change build on one another. And writing can be a tool and a resource at all of those stages. So the book is designed around various themes relating to family patterns, with writing exercises for each theme.
The key word that strikes me is small, because it seems to me when you think about a person who may want to be his own person, but yet he has this inheritance from his family that's hard to work around, I would guess sometimes it seems overwhelming to think of making those changes.
Yes, there was a man who spoke to me this morning, another interviewer, who said, I have no mid-range. I'm either just fine or I'm as furious as my dad used to be, and I swore I'd never be like that. So I suggested that he make a list of the kinds of situations in which that out-of-control anger seemed to come out, and then focus in on one situation from that written list and write some ideas of how he might catch those triggers a little sooner, so that if it were with his young son, he might be able eventually to sort of memorize and say to himself, okay, now I need to say to my kid, Daddy just needs a few minutes by himself. I'll be back and I'll talk more about this with you, rather than just going ballistic into the anger. And that's a small change that you can focus not on getting mad at work, getting mad with my spouse, getting mad with my kid, but one place where you can look for one small change to make.
So I can say, I'll just ignore the other things for a while, but with this particular person, I'm going to remember when this comes up.
Yes, and over time, a changed behavior generalizes to other areas of your life. You'll find yourself using the same tools of awareness, and maybe you're writing about how it's going with your kid, and suddenly you'll think, well, this is sort of as it is with my partner, my spouse, or my colleague. And then you can begin to apply some of the same tools in other areas. But if you try and do it all at once, it'll seem overwhelming.
It just occurred to me that it would be nice if you inherit money, then you can do as you wish with it. If you inherit tendencies and attitudes and values from your family, it's not always as easy to do what you wish with that.
Yes, because we develop an investment ourselves in the way things are. So the other thing I caution people is to expect resistance and surprises as you go about this process, not only from those in the family, because since family members are invested in the pattern, they may say, why are you trying to change that? I think you're wrong here. But you can expect resistance from inside yourself. So with many of the exercises, I suggest that you jot down what you might have to lose if you change a pattern, as well as what you have to gain. Because if you recognize up front gee, if I become more of a risk taker, I might fail more often. If, for instance, my family was extremely cautious and I want to change that, and I begin by taking a few little risks, one of the things that will be there to sabotage myself, perhaps, is that voice in my head will be rising up and saying, oh, better safe than sorry, maybe you shouldn't do this, and that I, too, am invested in the status quo.
Again, going back to the title of Family Patterns, say a little more about what family patterns are.
Sure. They're the attitudes and behavior that get passed on through the generations. I got interested in writing this book because I noticed family patterns in my own family as well as in the people I worked with. I'm a sixth-generation Californian and an only child of an only child, so I grew up hearing lots of family stories about all the people who'd lived before me. And when I was a young adult, I found a packet of letters written among members of my mother's family at the time of the San Francisco earthquake and fire in 1906. And I was amazed, reading them as an adult. I could see that they could have been written by my mother, me, and my daughter, instead of my great-grandmother, her sister, and her daughter. The personality traits, the way they faced the crisis of the earthquake and fire, was exactly the way that I felt I and my mother and my daughter would have faced it. And that showed me how strongly these particular things carry through the generations. I began wondering if there weren't a way to work with that more consciously and to help people change those patterns that don't work well for them.
So that having a family, for instance, who does a lot of entertaining and is very gregarious might be an example of a pattern.
Yes, and that may work very well for one child who's extroverted and social, but say another one feels very inhibited and shy, then they grow up perhaps not feeling good about themselves because they need much more quiet. They don't like to take on the responsibility of being a leader. They're more of a follower. So in order to become our own person, we need to identify how our individual traits may differ from what I call the family life stance, which is an overall approach to daily life in which these patterns play out.
So the stance, the family stance, is different than the family pattern.
The family stance is sort of an umbrella term that describes what the family patterns are. For instance, in the life of someone who isn't much of a risk taker, I remember a woman who said her family life stance was anxious caution. You know, don't do that, you might break it, this might happen. They always projected out all these anxieties, all of these dreadful consequences, and as a result, they could be pretty comfortable with keeping things stable and secure and not getting out there and trying new things. So for that woman, the patterns included not initiating things on her own, being afraid to speak up in public, having difficult time with her kids when they were daring and wanting to push the limits. She would be anxious and cautious with them. She could see that inherited family life stance translated into patterns that made her life more difficult, because she had married someone, as we often do, attract to our opposites, who was very daredevil, very trusting, things will work out for the best. And she was constantly in friction with him about what to allow their sons to do. And her fear he would dismiss in ways that made her feel bad about herself. And she needed to understand, no, this is just how I got to be because this is the way my family was. Your family was the one who was out there fishing and camping and pioneering, and I'm a stay-at-home type. That doesn't make me wrong and you right. So I think doing family patterns work helps all of us to make more room for ourselves and other people. It broadens our perspective.
This book came about, if I remember correctly, because you started doing workshops.
Yes.
And in the workshops you asked people to write about their experiences and also to do some storytelling surrounding those. What led you even before that to know that writing was a helpful way of reflecting on family experiences?
Well, it had been so for me. I was a journal keeper from childhood, and then when I began, I got my master's in marriage and family counseling and began working with individuals, I often would say, well, why don't you write some more about this, and here are some ideas, and I would just jot down some ideas for a writing exercise. I got so much encouraging feedback that the exercises I designed were helpful that I began thinking, maybe this is what I'm supposed to be doing, is teaching writing as a therapeutic tool to a broader range of people. So that's what I do. Writing does many things. It decreases your stress level, because it allows you to sort things out, simplify the complex, create order out of chaos. So automatically you start to feel better because you can see it there on paper. Half an hour from now, you and I may forget all the words we've said, but if we read a transcript, we could say, oh, there it is, this is what we talked about. Writing does that, it creates order. It also allows you to release feelings. And many of these family patterns are very tied up with long-held feelings. For instance, if your family thought it just wasn't too nice to talk about negative feelings, and then your grandfather died, say, and you never were allowed to say how sad you were and how much you missed him, you may need to write about that sadness now so that you can identify how its effect may still be there in your life. And by writing about it, you release the feeling.
So the effect is valid even if you're not writing quite immediately after a traumatic...
Oh, yes. Yes, I've had many people experience dramatic shifts and changes for the better in their feelings about themselves by writing. For instance, one writing technique I use is to write an unsent letter, something that you don't actually send to the person. Sometimes the person may be estranged from you, perhaps the person is dead. But still, by writing it down, there is an authentic form of communication that happens, and from that flows a sense of psychological completion.
To say nothing, that wonderful feeling of satisfaction when you've told them off.
Yes, absolutely.
What's your favorite experience out of storytelling and writing from your workshops?
Oh, the one that comes to mind is of a woman who came to one of my writing workshops because she felt that there were many sad threads from the past that were still nagging at her and things that didn't feel complete. So I actually was thinking about her when you asked the previous question. And she had had polio as a young girl and been in the hospital from when she was 12 to 14, recovered fully, but during that time experienced a number of traumatic experiences, one of which was that a little boy, maybe 8 or 9, who had been in the same room with her and had leukemia, died. And that was very painful for her. She had come to befriend him, and it happened in the night, and it was whisked away. She was never told. They wouldn't answer her questions. And so she just had this tremendous feeling of unresolvedness about this. And I suggested she write him one of these letters. And it just poured out of her, a very long letter about her feelings. And then she said, I feel like I'm not done. I feel like there's more I want to write. I would like to tell his story more fully, but I wish I knew his family. And I said, well, what was his last name? She said, I really don't even know. All I know is his nickname. They called him Cisco. He was a child from migrant worker family, Hispanic descent. And this was in a valley town in California. How would you ever trace it? But she went back. She put ads in the paper. She even learned Spanish and eventually traced and found his mother and sisters, and has written his life story and had it in a magazine along with her feelings of how she now feels like she's completed a chapter of her childhood that had been shut off before.
And sort of symbolized by completing a chapter of a book almost.
Right, exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So Carolyn, was it a natural progression for you who were dealing with writing to then decide to put this in book form?
Well, yes, I had had many people suggest that it needed to be out to a broader audience. And I was hesitant because I'd written a book before and it hadn't been published. I know what it's like to write something you care about and then go, maybe it doesn't fit the market today. So in the process of hesitating, another sort of dramatic family event came in, not just my family, it was our whole state, the Loma Prieta earthquake of 1989, which shook up the mid part of California quite badly, happened, And I was most concerned about my grandmother, who was the only survivor of the 1906 earthquake and fire, and at that time was living on the medical floor of a retirement home very near where a major freeway collapsed, killing many people. So I had good reason to be concerned about what had happened to her. And for about 6 hours, I couldn't get through. The phones were down. And when I finally reached them, with all these memories of my grandmother's childhood, going out on her family, outside her family home, camping, and watching the fire come through San Francisco towards their house, I finally reached the people at the facility, and they said, "Oh, Mrs. Gerhardt is all right, but we can't get her to bed. She's standing at the window watching San Francisco burn." And I said, "Well, she's done it before." And she's still alive today at 99.
Powerful image.
It is a powerful image, and it just impelled me. I thought, this story needs to go forward. I need to do it for Mimi, that's my grandmother. And so I called the editor, and he was able to see something in all of my impassioned words and ideas, and encouraged me to turn the course into a book, which I have now done.
Sounds like you did the right thing. I want you to tell the viewers too about being on Oprah Winfrey and what that did for your book, because it's a fun story.
It is. The book was published January 6, 1993, and on January 13th, I got a call from my publisher that Oprah was interested in having me come on. Each year she chooses one theme to do a monthly series of shows about. Last year it was racism. 1993, it's to be the state of the American family. And my book just happened to land on her desk while she was trying to figure out what show she would kick off the series with. So I was flown back to Chicago and did the TV, talk about jumping into the ocean. I'd never been on TV before. The next day there were 13,000 orders for the book. So that was very gratifying, both to me and my publisher, who hadn't expected that, as nor had I. So it's been very exciting.
Should stand out as a how to sell your book kind of technique. Obviously, you feel that writing is a way to experience change. What about people who don't like to write, don't think they're good at writing?
Yes, I think that's important, because many of us don't like to write because of early experiences, perhaps unfortunate ones in school, where all that got noticed was the bad spelling or the poor grammar, so we hold ourselves back from using writing as a tool. This is not about any of that, not about English composition. It's about getting to the heart of your own experience. So the exercises are designed for people who aren't familiar with writing. Some of them are unfinished sentences. For instance, the emotion I most often feel when I'm with my family these days is, and then you just go ahead and put whatever comes to your mind. Or you can write a timeline about what things were happening in your family at different times. You can list certain qualities and characteristics you feel you inherited from your families. I have dialogues where you can have an imaginary conversation with a family member or with a part of yourself. Maybe the you that at 5 was really hurt when something happened in the family, and the you now that has a different perspective to offer that child. So all of these kinds of exercises assist people in getting into writing very painlessly. And they find generally that once they begin, it just sort of flows, and then there's no stopping people. So
I had some fun doing some of the exercises as I was looking at the book, and one of the ones that I did was the timeline. And when I first looked at it, I thought, well, we had kind of a dull family. We just all grew up in the same place.
Yes.
We never moved. It was very, very stable. So, timeline will be nothing. And as I began to fill it in, I realized there were changes in our family. Our grandparents moved in with us during the war years. And you're right, it did bring up some interesting memories for me.
Yes.
That if I had just been talking about that, I think would have escaped me entirely.
Yes, I think it's very useful to have the written record there, because it primes the pump of memory. And the more you can use vivid details, writing about a special place where you felt safe or comfortable in your family home. Maybe your viewers, as they listen, might think of, was it lying in your bed? Was it under a big tree in your yard? Was it in a clubhouse that you made with your friends? And you can call on those places of shelter and protection to help you deal with anxieties and traumatic things associated with the process of reclaiming some of those roots and understanding the patterns and changing the destructive ones.
Before we run out of time, I want to just briefly say how the book is organized. There are 3 main sections. The first one on your family background, the second one on writing your roots, which I believe is the name of your workshops, right?
Yes.
And the final one, repatterning, looking for new growth. Of course, I obviously concluded that doing new growth was the most important part of the book, but I wanted to ask you what you thought the most important part was, or perhaps the most rewarding part for you.
I think the most rewarding part for me as a writer, and I can't reflect, on doing the exercises, but in a way I had to process all this myself. I thought I had dealt with all my family patterns, and yet in the writing of this book there was a great deal of growth. And the one that helped me the most was to look at versions of the truth in a family. That every member of a family will see the truth differently, and that all versions stem from attempts to adapt. That's important because it's easy to blame ourselves or to blame others in the family when most of us are doing the best we can and are coming at it from the perspective that helps us deal with the circumstances from our personality and our situation. And finally, that in finding our own version of the truth, we will be set free. So those ideas have been most powerful for me.
By adapt, do you mean as children in their family situation in order to live with their family situation?
Yes.
In other words, the child may sort of twist himself around to fit.
Absolutely.
And so the last part of the book is the untwisting, so to speak, and
yes.
becoming who you really were all along,
right.
but weren't able to put into...
Bringing out various facets of yourself. I have a whole chapter on the aspects of self, of body, mind, emotions, and spirit, so you can assess what kind of messages you got from your family about those various areas. And maybe begin, as I said, the one woman who said, if my brother's the smart one, what about me? She went on to begin exploring what kinds of mental abilities she had and being more creative. And it felt like a tremendous release to her.
Well, the interesting part about that question is it doesn't necessarily have a negative answer. If my brother
right.
was smart, maybe I'm creative. If
yes.
my brother was smart, maybe I'm something else.
And maybe I'm smart in a different way than my brother is smart.
Thank you so much for being with us, Carolyn.
Thank you,
It's been
Eileen.
a pleasure to have you. I do recommend the Family Patterns workbook for its fun and its insight and its creativity.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to have been here.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.